Hey guys, this is gonna be a Raynor basic guide for co-op. This guide is meant to let beginner and intermediate players learn to handle brutal difficulty without much issues, and just to let you get into the feel of how effective Raynor play looks like. And let's get into it. Raynor is a really nice commander, even in his without any prestige at all. The idea is you just have infinite minerals with the proper build, and that lets you spam either Marines or mech, most commonly Marines. And supported by medics, they just have absolutely insane DPS, which lets them pretty much win everything. With some mech support when Marines alone don't manage, but usually just Marines and medics alone would just win you anything in the map extremely rapidly. So let's start with the build order. The initial build order is kinda unintuitive, so I'm gonna go over it right now. You don't actually build any units until you have 3 command centers improved into orbital commands. The reason for this is just the insane economical power of mules, which lets you get infinite value over time. So by making 3 command centers early on, you get that value much earlier, and you also get supply, which would be more economical than doing the regular supply depot into barracks into orbital command that's more common on ladder. So as you can see, I'm making workers until 15 supply, and then immediately planting a command center with my first 400 minerals, and then I wait for another 400 minerals and do exactly the same thing with the next command center, which I build in this case near the rocks because it's just more economical to have it close by. But on unguarded expansions, you can just as well build it near your main base. Then with the first 150 minerals, I immediately build the barracks, and because of the slick timing of the build, the barracks will be ready just about as the first command center is building, and then you upgrade both with 300 minerals into orbital commands. Then you can start pumping Marines straight away, but it's not actually all that important because of how powerful the Banshee and the Duskwing Banshee cooldowns is, but we'll get to that in a minute. As you can see, the command centers are building, and soon the mules will be pumping, and the fact we didn't build any units or SCVs during the time just doesn't matter that much because of how insanely powerful mules are. And it's my personal preference to use the Marines to smash the rocks, but as said, I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but where you just wanna beat brutal missions, it doesn't matter enough that you need to worry about it much. Here, because the attack wave is pretty fast, I delay it a bit with the Marine. Usually you won't need to, but it helps to know this for when you can. And there, Duskwings show up, and Duskwings and Hyperion are the reason Raynor is so can afford to be so economical and greedy, because it doesn't actually need to produce units for the first attack waves. The Duskwings and Hyperion will absolutely wreck any objective at this stage. Meanwhile, as you can see, I'm making gas, and then I will upgrade the barracks with a tech lab and start pumping medics. And that's basically your entire army comp for the entire game, because Marine and medics are awesome. There's no reason to save energy for scan this early in the game, so I just pump fuels all the time. And from this point onwards, you basically want to have 1 racks with a tech lab, 1 racks with a reactor. But and then from the reactor racks you pump 2 Marines at a time, and from the tech lab racks you pump 1 medic at a time, and that's enough until you have another 4 orbital commands. You get all your gases, you get engineering bay for upgrades, you start a factory with your next 100 gas to be able to build an armory later to upgrade even more engineering bay, and then you just pump Marines and medics. That's all you really need to do, unless for very specific comps, which I'll go over in a minute. But for this camp, just Marine and medic will be enough. As you can see, I have very low unit count. I could have had much more if I spent my money better, but ignore that. Even though I don't, that's just just fine because Hyperion and Duskwings really cover you well for the early game. This is, by the way, the stats you will have when your Raynor is maxed. The strategy doesn't change mine when it's not, but being maxed with full mastery makes your Banshee uptime really insane if you invest all your mastery into lower Duskwing cooldowns. So that lets you really cover the early game much more easily. It's still doable just the same before max level, but it's just gonna be tighter, and you'll probably need to be a bit more tight on timings. Seriously, I have a fight which I see I won't be able to take easily. I just spam Duskwings, and as you can see, the Hyperion cooldown is already up for a while. So if the fight was even harder for whatever reason, I could have just used that. You can definitely, and it's actually really smart, if you know the map well, you could use the Hyperion on some objective or base to weaken it. It's very much not necessary though in regular Brutal, but it's a really good tactic to know, or for speedruns, of those of you that like that. And a really useful thing to know about the Hyperion, which many players aren't aware of, is that it actually does much higher damage when moving. There is a technical explanation for that, but that's beyond the scope of this guide. So all you need to know right now is that if you want to maximize not kill a specific target and just maximize DPS, just make the Hyperion move, and it will kill even swarms of flings pretty damn fast, despite being technically single target damage, because it just shoots so goddamn fast. And then I'm just gonna keep spamming Marines and medics and the occasional Marauder for the rest of the game. The Marauder is mostly to pump up your army size to defend against splash damage. It's not really necessary versus this comp. The Marauders just have this slow upgrade, which really helps in small numbers versus certain comps. So it's like never a really bad idea to have like 3 or 4, and versus armored ground enemies you can always have more. It's not necessary, just a small optimization. As you can see, like the marine count is growing higher, and like the DPS is just absolutely retarded. You don't even need, like, Raynor doesn't need splash damage. He has siege tanks, but he doesn't need them because marines are hit scan and their attack speed is so fast they just kill even swarms of enemies extremely efficiently. Kind of like Tychus in a way, only not concentrated in a single overpowered unit. Another really good technique that you can see here, which is obviously very common with much better ladder people than me, is stutter stepping, which is where you just move slightly, press the stop button, your units will hit, and you repeat that to have like a maximum DPS while constantly moving, which helps a lot when like killing bases or progressing towards dangerous enemies like Broodlords, where you don't want to just move a lot and waste DPS. The game is gonna go on pretty easily from now because the enemy comp is just not good versus Marines. Some rare enemy comps you will need help, namely, or pretty much exclusively Protoss heavy mech, which is Disruptors and Reavers and Colossus, because all of those units are very dangerous versus Marines, and even with good micro you might lose. Like, unless your micro is absolutely exceptional, you might lose a lot of Marines and just lose to attrition over time. You won't lose money because Raynor, like, once he gets his mule count up, he never lacks for minerals. But you might just lose fights because you can't regenerate your Marines fast enough. So versus those comps, which we won't see here, so I'll just describe it in short. And I might make a different guide just for that when I cover Prestige 2 for Raynor, because that Prestige is pretty much meant to have mech support. Versus those kind of comps, you have mech support, namely siege tanks, which just annihilate them from superior range, and then you still have a big clump of Marines to mop up the non-range units, or like the non-artillery range units. And then you beat them just the same, and it's really easy. Here's some more stutter stepping and getting close to the side objective. And meanwhile, you can see the Vulture Mines usage, which is also incredibly useful and actually a good alternative in some situations to siege tanks, or a complementary tactic. What you do is you have those vultures and they can drop mines whenever you want. And the mines cost minerals, but as you probably noticed, a theme here, Raynor doesn't lack minerals ever. So what you do is you put the mines preferably where the enemies spawn. If you don't know spawn locations, you can put them before in routes where the enemy is coming, but that won't be nearly as efficient because often the enemy waves on Brutal have detection and long range units, so it will just delay them because they will kill the mines, but they won't actually get hit. So once you learn spawn positions, which in this map, for example, is the edges of each of the free routes, and the place just being ping where I built all my turrets and placed the mines where you saw just a moment ago. Those places are where enemy spawns, and even if they have detection, the mines will instantly just target them and annihilate any grounder, which is incredibly useful. If you have an enemy force composed of both like some ground, some air, you can do what I just did as you saw earlier ago and have turrets in the spawn location. And this specific match, I didn't do it as like you see, I cleared the spawn location here, so I could have done it here, but I didn't want to do it because my ally is a friend, and I didn't want to steal all the glory from her, because then it's just not very fun where vultures spam all the spawn points and you don't get any action. But if it's like a hard mutation, or if your ally like seems to not be able to handle himself or needs some help, you can definitely do it. It's an excellent tactic. You just go to the spawn locations, you clear them of enemy buildings, and on the grand majority of maps that's not very hard to do, especially with Raynor's insane base building DPS. And you cover it with mines and just add turrets, and you put the mines between the turrets, and nothing is gonna survive. Pure air comps won't be affected by this, obviously, because mines can't hit air. And then you just don't do it. You just rely on Marines. Occasionally Vikings, though that's by and large, Marines don't need help versus any form of air. You can see that just 5-6 orbital commands are enough to have practically infinite minerals. And even if I last all my firsts right now, it would take like 2 minutes or so to completely remax, and my mineral bank won't fill it. And because this is like a swarm of tiny units, as you can see, like nothing gets past the mid grinder. And at this point, medics become kind of irrelevant, because sure, you want them, they heal, it's nice. But even if you don't have medics, Marines are so cost efficient and so cheap that replacing them is just as good. By the way, all the temple damage is because I was lazy and forgot to defend against Scourge. Like normally it wouldn't even be damaged. So don't do that. Except from that, it's a really smooth sailing mission, and the grand majority of your Raynor games will look like this. Like once you get into the hang of making greedy orbital builds and just microing your barracks and supplies properly, and just keep pumping Marines, then nothing will be able to get past you, pretty much. We're gonna see a bunch of big waves right now, so I'm gonna show how to handle them, but the basic of it is just stim before every fight. Yeah, I forgot to mention stim to those of you who don't play Terran Ladder or Campaign, but it's the ability which I used just now, which increases their movement speed and attack speed. You stim a bit before a fight, you drug up, you engage while stimmed, and just the sheer level of DPS will be enough to kill everything. And for split attacks, Raynor actually lacks very good mobility, which is why vulture mines and turrets are very good for when you don't want to split your forces. And here, like just the sheer amount of buildings is delaying them enough, so that's okay. And my ally is very competent, so she covered her part of the base, or her part of the temple, sorry. But even if not, you can save Hyperion for split attacks. You can save Banshee if it's ground, or even Banshee versus air just to delay them a bit, because they will usually have detection and then they will delay a couple of seconds on the Banshee. But generally, just good positioning, good cooldown usage. Here he's storming at me, and I don't even care, because as long as it doesn't kill the Marines in a single storm, he's just gonna die and the medics are gonna heal it anyway. And even if he did kill all those Marines, I would just renew them in heartbeat. Like look, I'm renewing around, I don't know, 20 supply per 10 seconds here or something. And that's really Raynor, Prestige 0. And this build order will be very useful for all of his prestiges, except Prestige 3, which is mostly centered around the Skyplay. Prestige 1, you don't need mules, so it's a very simplified version of this this build order, which is the whole point of Prestige 1, basically, to make it simple. But yeah, learning this, you'll be fit to do proper Raynor macro and play in any mode you want.